Hello and welcome to Thoughts on Rice, a podcast hosted by the University of California Cooperative Extension Rice Advisors. I'm one of your hosts, Sarah Marcianish, and I'm a rice farm advisor for Colusa and Yolo counties.
I'm Whitney from DeForest. I'm the Cooperative Extension Rice Advisor for Sutter, Yuba, Placer, and Sacramento counties.
My name is Luis Espino. I'm the Rice Farming Systems Advisor for Butte and Glenn counties.
I'm Michelle Leinfelder-Miles. I'm a farm advisor in the Delta region. I work on all sorts of field crops, grains and forages, but one of those is rice. And the counties that I cover are San Joaquin, Sacramento, Yolo, Solano, and Contra Costa counties.
Together, the UCCE Rice Farm Advisors seek to provide relevant, topical, research-backed information relating to California rice production. For the first time on Thoughts on Rice, we are excited to welcome our first guest to not work in California rice, Dr. Lina Bernaola, an entomologist with Texas A&M AgriLife Research and Extension. Dr. Bernaola is a key member of a research team that is seeking to combat the rise of rice delphacid, a newer pest that is wreaking havoc across Texas and Louisiana as a vector of the Hoya Blanca disease. While we on the West Coast have yet to see this pest in our fields, knock on wood, it's important to stay vigilant about pests that have impacts to the rice industry as a whole. And as Dr. Bernaola will mention, especially about pests that can disperse as easily as this one can. Welcome to Thoughts on Rice, Dr. Bernaola. How are you today?
Good, Sarah. Thank you for inviting me to this podcast. I'm happy to reach out to more audience in California. I know that, it has a different rice growing system. So I'm happy to share, any scientific information that I can.
Well, we're really pleased to have you on here. Actually, you are our inaugural out-of-state guest. So we are just absolutely thrilled that we have you here to make the time to talk about the rice delphacid, because as I know that probably most of our listeners are aware, that's a pretty huge pest when it comes to the rice industry. But before we get into that, I'd first like to ask you just a little bit about your educational background and how you came to be in your current role.
Sure. I'm originally from Lima, Peru. I'm Lina from Lima, where potato and rice are important staples. And I always been fascinated how plants and insects interact. So after I finished my undergraduate studies back home, I received my master's in agronomy and PhD in entomology at Louisiana State University, focusing on rice insect interactions. So currently, I am an assistant professor and a rice entomologist at Texas A&M AgriLife Research in Bowman, and my work focuses on understanding the biology, ecology, and management of insect pest of rice in Texas, as well as developing sustainable management strategies that makes it practical for rice farmers.
And as I'm sure our listeners are aware, I mean, the station in Beaumont is a critical hub of rice research, not only for Texas, but across the Mid-South. So it's just on a personal note, that's where our very own Luis Espino did a lot of his graduate work. So it's nice how it's such a small world and everything kind of ties together.
That's right. You are right about that. Also, maybe that is not important to this podcast, but he's also Peruvian.
Exactly. And also an entomologist.
That's right.
Man. So, Lina, I think what we want to focus on mostly today is talking about the rice delphacid. And so, as I understand it, this, I guess, was recognized in Texas approximately 2015. But can you give us a bit of background about how it was discovered, who first saw it, and maybe what that looked like at that end?
Sure. The rice delphacid is a plant hopper and an invasive insect pest of rice in the United States. This pest arrived in Texas rice in 2015, and since then has moved from being a sporadic raccoon field pest into an intensifying threat. which is prompting emergency insecticide approvals, sustained research, and a vigilant industry response, because the pest can also be a vector of rice hoja blanca virus. Now, in terms of history, in 2015, it was first detected in Texas ratoon rice around the Galveston area of southeast Texas, where a crop consultant, Cliff Mock, saw some ratoon fields with infestations. So that year, localized yield losses were reported, I believe, up to 20% in those affected fields. So that detection basically made AgriLife researchers immediately alert growers. So in 2016, the rice entomologists, Dr. Moway, and crop consultants continue monitoring the rice fields and didn't record any observations of the rice delphacid. And research emphasized that populations favor ratoon or late planted rice and often spike after heavy rains. So now in 2017, we had Harvey. So probably this situation made farmers forget about the insect because they got over 50 inches of rainfall. And that year, there were no records of this pest as well. In 2018, there was another notable outbreak that occurred in ratoon rice around some areas. At that time, Dr. Moway and his Syngenta collaborator collected field efficacy trials, which ultimately led to the request and approval of Section 18 for indigo ZZ, which expired in 2021. And from 2019 and to 2021, detections were generally low, and researchers continue with monitoring efforts. It was only present in ratoon crops. In these years, the pest started to spread to other counties as well. So now in 2022, the rice delphacid problem got worse. And this year, I joined Texas A&M in the spring and immediately started to request and receive a EPA Section 18's emergency exemption, allowing the use of indigo ZZX, which was a replacement of indigo ZZ for the rice delphacid control in the Texas rice belt counties. Now, that exemption was effective in October 2022. So this was a major management step because of the legal emergency use, access to a tool, while longer-term solutions were being developed. Now, in 2023, there was a marginal field infestations, and that year we had extremely dry conditions as well, which may have been a factor. However, things changing in 2024, we had a big storm named Beryl in July 8, and following this event, we started to observe rice delphacid almost everywhere in the Texas rice belt, and in addition, hopper-borne damage in some areas. Now, that year as well was the first time that we saw the hoja blanca disease in some rice fields. In 2025, Texas experienced much larger infestations, where fields beyond ratoon rice were impacted and some areas reported first crop damage and kernel quality issues. So in addition, the pest was reported in nearby rice states, such as Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi during 2025 surveillance. And industry groups and universities elevated their responses with multi-state coordination, including more field trials. So national industry outlets describe 2025 as the worst year to date for U.S. rice in terms of rice delphacid impacts.
So those years that you mentioned, I mean, in 17, it was Hurricane Harvey. And then in 24, it was Hurricane Beryl, if I'm remembering correctly. Is there any indication that the weather events had some kind of impact on the population?
Yes, it is possible that the presence of rice delphacids in Texas rice fields could be influenced by weather events. For example, a shift in temperature, rainfall, and humidity could play key roles in their population dynamics. The rice delphacids thrive in humid, warm environments, conditions that are favorable in Texas, especially during its typical summer months. When storms and heavy rainfall occur, they can create the perfect environment for these pests. In addition, if we think about our rice flooded systems in Texas are under flooding conditions, which provide also a suitable environment for the nymphs or the baby plant hoppers, which feed on the rice plants. Another example we notice is that after tropical storms or hurricanes, rice delphacid populations tend to spike in certain areas where the moisture supports their development and survival. On the other side, dry conditions or cooler than average temperatures can reduce as well their presence. During drought years, like for example the one that we had in 2023, rice delphacids were less likely to be flooded, which could have limited the presence of the delphacids in the delphacid habitat. These fluctuations in the rice delphacid populations based on weather events highlight basically the complexity of managing this pest. And ultimately, climate variability could become a critical factor, or is becoming a critical factor in shaping the pest impact in Texas rice in the coming years.
I did want to ask if you could give us a description of what this actually looks like, what this insect looks like, if there's any differences between the sexes or any kind of morphological characteristics.
Of course, when we talk about the rice delphacid, or sometimes also called the rice plant hopper, we are referring to a very small but significant insect pest of rice. They belong to a group of sap-sucking insects, so they basically feed on the plant's juices, which can cause a lot of damage over time, such as the hopperborn. Visually, they are tiny, usually only about 3 to 4 millimeters long, so you would need to look closely to see much detail. Adults are generally a pale brown to yellowish color, and they have a sort of triangle-shaped body, typical of plant hoppers. Their wings are transparent and held over the body when at rest, giving them a sleek and pointed look. Now, if you look under magnification, you would see they have fairly large reddish-brown eyes and the long back legs. These are designed for jumping, so they can hop around quickly from plant to plant, and which is the reason why they spread easily through the rice fields. Now, there are some subtle differences between males and females. Females tend to be slightly larger and more robust, while males are a bit slimmer. And something also worth to noting is that rice delphacid can appear in two winged forms, short wing and long wing. And this will depend on the environmental conditions. For example, short-winged females are more common in stable conditions and stay there to reproduce, while the long-winged ones can fly longer distances, and this helps them to spread to new rice fields. So while these adults may look just like another small brown insect, these rice delphacids are well adapted to rice environments, and their appearance ties directly to their ability to thrive and move within the rice crop and possible other hosts as well, related hosts. Also, we have the baby plant hoppers called nymphs, which gradually increase in size and pigmentations, resembling the pale, smaller versions of the adults, but without wings. And this is the most damaging stage in regards to the impact on rice production.
Do they have any idea of where this pest is native to or where it could have possibly come from?
That is a great question. Well, researchers believe it's native to the tropical and subtropical regions of the Americas. So think Central and South America and part of the Caribbean. It has been known also as a major pest in countries like Colombia, Peru, Venezuela, and part of the Central America as well for quite a while. As for how it made its way into the United States, and specifically into rice-growing areas like Texas, the most likely explanation is through natural movement and trade. These insects are good flyers, especially the long-wing forms, and they can travel on air currents over fairly long distances. So some movement from tropical regions north isn't surprising, to be honest, especially during favorable weather patterns. It is also possible that they can catch a ride through the movement or shipment of infested plant material or equipment. That's something we have seen with other plant hopper species. But overall, the most supported view is that this pest has gradually expanded its range north over time, as conditions in the southern U.S. rice regions have become more suitable for them. So while it might seem like a new arrival, in my opinion, the rice delphacid have been waiting just south of us for years and is now taking advantage of the right combination of climate and habitat to establish itself in places like Texas. In addition, according to work done in Texas by Dr. Moway and a former PhD student, Dr. Jacqueline Martin, she looked into this question as well by using genetic markers to see if our Texas populations were related to those found in South America. What she found was really exciting. The genetic match was over 99%. So that basically tells us that the rice delphacid populations that we are seeing here in Texas are likely came from regions where the insect is native, mainly Central and South America. So it's a combination of natural movement and human factors that probably allow this pest to make its way into Texas rice fields.
Okay. And then as far as hosts for this insect, is it just rice that they like to feed on, or there are other crops or plants that they like to infest?
Well, rice is definitely their preferred host. That's where they thrive and reproduce and cause the most economic damage. The rice plant provides everything that they need, from tender plant tissue to plenty moisture. So that's really their main target. That said, rice delphacids also survive in some other grasses. I have found, for example, that insect feeding on a few wild weedy grasses that are closely related to rice, like echinocloa, which we know as barnyard grass. Those are what we call alternate hosts. The insect don't usually reach high numbers there, but those plants can definitely help the population persist between, crop seasons or rice crops or nearby field edges and ditches. But in terms of real preference and population build-up, it's rice for sure, their preferred host. Now, those other grasses are more like backup options that could help the insect hang around until the next rice crop comes back. And that is what is important from a management perspective. If those grasses are left unmanaged around levees, canals, or field margins, they can serve as a sort of a refugee for rice delphacids. When the new rice crop comes in, those populations can quickly move back into the field and start causing problems again. So part of the managing this pest isn't just what we do in the rice field. It's also about keeping an eye on the surrounding vegetation. And good weed control around rice growing areas can really help reduce those early season infestations. So also something that I forgot to mention before is that females going back to the life cycle is that females can lay eggs in between 100 to 150 eggs over one lifetime. So that's a lot of eggs.
Quite a bit. How many generations are there typically?
That's a good question. Well, because Texas has a warm climate and long growing season, the rice delphacid can complete several generations per year. We usually see about 3 to 4 generations during a normal rice season. The first generation of them starts to appear toward the late part of the main crop, and then their numbers can really build up going into the ratoon crop. When conditions are still warm and there is plenty of green plant tissue to feed on, there is still opportunity for the delphacid to keep feeding there. Each generation develops pretty quickly, and under ideal conditions, they can go from egg to adult in just a few weeks. So if temperatures stay favorable, populations can overlap and build up fast. That's why sometimes we see those sudden spikes late in the season. Now, in Texas, we are talking about 3 to 4 overlapping generations of rice delphacid each year, with the heaviest activities often lining up with the ratoon crop. And again, I want to emphasize that's why early detection and management are so important. So once they get established, those overlapping life cycles can make the management control a real challenge.
Wow, yeah. And then as the nymphs move through the instars, as they get larger, does the amount of damage they create, is that proportional to them getting larger as well, or does it stay pretty consistent?
That's an interesting question, Sarah. Does the amount of damage rice delphacid cause depend on their life cycle or stage from nymphs to adults? In general, yes. The damage tends to increase as the insect develops. Both nymphs and adults feed in the same way, by inserting their mouth parts into the plant and sucking the juices out. But as the nymphs go through their instars and get larger, their feeding rate increases as well. So the overall impact on the plant goes up. Now, smaller nymphs, or those early instars, as also we call, feed less and typically cause minimal visible damage on their own. It's those later instars and the adults that really start to stress the plants. Now, when populations get high, you will see symptoms like yellowing, plant stunting, or even drying of the leaves, especially in the ratoon crop where plants are already under some stress. Another thing to keep in mind is that the damage is additive. So even though each individual nymph or adult might not do much harm, when you have overlapping generations and a dense population, the feeding pressure increases quickly. So what should growers be watching for during the rice season? The first clue is usually those hoppers jumping when you walk through the field. That's often a sign that populations are starting to build up. So you might also notice a sticky honeydew on the leaves or a sooty mold growing on the tissue as well. that's another sign of heavy feeding. That's why it's important to scout early and regularly, especially late in the main crop and going into the ratoon crop. Catching those populations before the larger names and adults take over can make a big difference in keeping the crop healthy and minimizing any kind of yield loss.
But I think, as you alluded to, the rice hoja blanca it's a bigger deal as far as how much yield loss you can see with this. Do we have numbers? Do we have quantifiable data on how much a field can be affected in terms of yield if it's infested with hoja blanca?
Well, while the rice delphacid feeding can stress plants and reduce vigor, it is really the rice hoja blanca disease, which is the virus that this insect transmits, that can really cause the most serious yield losses. In regions where the disease have been established for a long time, like Central and South America, yield losses can range anywhere from 10 to over 60%, depending on how early the infestation occurs and how severe it is. In the worst cases, specifically when young plants are infected, early in the season, fields can be almost completely wiped out. So now here in Texas, the situation has been a little bit different. Since the rice delphacid only recently became established, we haven't seen those extreme widespread losses like in tropical regions. But in localized spots where both the insect and the virus are present, we are noticing that reductions in yield and stand density, particularly in the ratoon crop. So the key takeaway is that it's not just the presence of the insect, it's whether the population is carrying also the virus. And even relatively low number of delphacids can cause major problems if they are transmitting the hoja blanca virus early in the season.
Wow. And so, because it's a virus, I mean, most of the time, at least in the West, our diseases are all fungal diseases. So we rely pretty exclusively on fungicides. But with a virus, as you said, your main method of control is going to be controlling the vector, the insect.
You are absolutely right. And that is a really important distinction that I would like to make for your audience. With fungi, we have tools like fungicides that we can apply to protect the crop. But the hoja blanca, because it's a virus, it's not a fungus, and this change the whole management approach. Now, the key with the virus is that you can spray it directly. There is no chemical that will cure an infected plant. So the main way to protect your crop is by controlling the vector, in this case, the insect, the rice delphacid. So if we keep the insect populations in check, we dramatically reduce the chances of the virus spreading in the field. And the plant pathologist at the center, Dr. Shane Zhou, is looking more into the disease in the virus, and we'll have more answers in the near future.
We might need to do a rice delphacid arc. Yeah, little section. Yeah, that'd be really interesting. Because, I mean, it sounds like in order to really combat the problem that this is, it's going to really need to be an integrative approach. I mean, and so as far as that, you kind of mentioned this when I heard a previous podcast episode, but there's a task force assembled consisting of several scientists in the area trying to remedy this problem. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, we have formed a rice delphacid multi-state task force, and with not only entomologists but also other scientists from different rice growing areas, since this pest has spread to Arkansas, Florida, Louisiana, and Mississippi. So we are diligently working to develop a broader response. USA Rice recently facilitated the formation of the Delphacid Task Force to coordinate strategies to address, these emerging issues. The task force is made up of research and extension scientists from all the southern rice producing states, as well as consultants and farmers. The task force is facilitating multi-state research in insecticide screening, resistant breeding efforts, agronomic practices, and other appropriate areas as well.
And so you must be doing a lot of monitoring across these states to try and estimate the numbers of rice delphacid. Can you talk to us a bit about how that monitoring works?
Yes, I can speak to how the extension specialist, Dr. Sam Ruston, and I are monitoring rice delphacid populations in Texas. It is a big part of what we do, especially now that the insect is established here and also other rice growing states. The goal is really to track their numbers and life stages so that we can predict when feeding damage might be the highest. Most monitoring rely on field scouting, which require using a sweep net method. You basically sample sections in the field, count how many insects you see, and record whether they are nymphs or adults. That gives a snapshot of the population and whether it's increasing. In addition, my entomology program is starting to use yellow sticky traps along the field edges as well. These traps help to catch adults that are flying in from nearby areas or migrating long distances. And by checking these traps regularly, we can estimate movement patterns and see if populations are building before the insect reaches the main crop. I am planning to continue using those traps beyond the regular rice season to monitor overwintering phases as well. And all this information will be used to guide management decisions, like the timing of insecticide applications or scouting frequency as well.
So, Lina, we've talked about what your team does, what the scientists are doing for monitoring, but what about the people who are boots on the ground, the farmers and maybe even the county agents or crop advisors that they work with? How are they doing monitoring efforts?
The scientists try to do monitoring with the people we have. But to be honest, the real work comes from extension specialists, farmers, counting agents, and crop consultants. They are the ones actually walking the fields and seeing what is going on on a day-to-day basis. On the farm, monitoring usually starts with regular scouting. Farmers or crop consultants will check different areas in the field, paying attention to hotspots like levees, field edges, and ratoon areas where rice delphacids tend to build up first. They often use sweep nets or even simple visual inspections, watching for the insects jumping when the plants are disturbed, or a classic sign that populations are increasing. Some crop consultants or farmers sometimes call me to make visits to their fields and make sure that if there is an important insect that needs to be identified, such as the rice delphacid, that we can do this on time.
Absolutely. I kind of wanted to ask you, and I'd like to caveat this by saying that any mention of a pesticide is not a recommendation. It's just mentioned for use of research purposes. But I did want to ask if there are any insecticide treatments available that have been effective in controlling rice delphacid.
We officially have 2 insecticides approved for the management of this pest in Texas rice fields: Indigo ZZX and Tenchu. Both overlap as neonicotinoids, but Indigo ZZX has a pyrethroid as well. However, despite using those options, numbers of rice delphacid have still been problematic. Currently, my research program is evaluating other insecticides, such as insect growth regulators that specifically target the nymphal stage. In addition, it is important that we find more chemistries to be able to rotate chemical classes to avoid building resistance in the future.
From the message or from what I think we've talked about earlier in this episode, you mentioned that you have been seeing this pest on some grassy weeds, things like that. And so I would assume maybe cultural controls for this would also be doing some really intensive weed management, trying to mow levees and and road edges and trying to reduce habitat. Is that accurate?
Yes, one of the things we have learned is that rice delphacids don't only hang out in rice. They can survive on some grassy weeds around the field, as I mentioned it before. Those areas along levees, canals, or roadsides can act as refuges for the insects between crops. That's where cultural control comes in, managing those grassy areas by mowing, removing weeds, or controlling vegetation along field edges can make a real difference. By reducing the habitat where delphacids can hide and reproduce, we can help lower early season populations before they move into the main crop. Of course, this is not a complete solution. It works best when combined with other regular scouting and targeted insect management in the rice fields themselves. So keeping those weeds in check helps reduce the overall pressure on your crop and can make any insecticide application more effective and perhaps less frequent as well.
And so I kind of asked you about your current research efforts, but would you care to mention any other research or outreach efforts that you or your team or your program are doing with the rice delphacid?
Of course, my research team is looking at several aspects right now. First, we are studying the biology of the rice delphacid under Texas conditions because insects behave differently depending on the environment. My team has now established a rice delphacid colony since we have the same insect problem at our center that is letting us to do more greenhouse research as well. Also, we are actively screening Texas commercial rice varieties and some other varieties from South America that potentially have tolerance to the rice delphacid to see which ones show some natural resistance or tolerance to this pest. And this is also in collaboration with a multi-state task force. In addition, we are also collaborating with breeders at the center to evaluate whether certain rice varieties show tolerance or resistance to the pest or the virus. We are also testing both current insecticides and newer chemistries, especially insect growth regulators, which seem promising. The reason we focus on insect growth regulators is because they work differently than typical insecticides and may show effectiveness on the rice delphacid nymphs, which are more difficult to control. And from an outreach perspective, we are working closely with counting agents and rice producers to provide updates through field days, workshops, and extension materials. The goal is to make sure growers know what to look for and have the tools to respond effectively. Future research will include investigating biological control options and developing economic thresholds.
There's a lot of resources available then, and we'll be sure to link to not only the fact sheet, but also the page that has a lot of information about rice delphacid in our show notes as well. But you all are working extremely hard, not only at trying to mitigate this problem, but to get the information where it needs to be in the hands of the growers and the crop advisors, it seems like.
That's correct. We are being proactive to manage this pest and developing information for the stakeholders.
Incredibly so. I mean, it seems as though the Texas rice industry has been hit with a lot these last few years. And to have a pest such as this become so widespread, it's just more and more hardship, I'd say, put on the producers, it seems like.
Yeah, and if you think about it, the rice price this year is not really good. So whatever they are getting from the rice season this year, especially from the ratoon crop, I'm not sure if that's going to justify all the spending that they are doing on the insecticides and fertilizers for this year. So yeah, I totally understand the frustration that they have right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, especially as you said, it affects the ratoon crop disproportionately, and as I understand it, the ratoon crop is usually a pretty low input crop. It's your second crop. You mow it down and then maybe apply a fertilizer, maybe an insecticide.
Yep, the ratoon crop is what growers count on to be able to realize their profit. So they usually expect between 30 to 35 of ratoon crop. But if you have an impact from insects, then that proportion will be less and less.
And then your profit margin, it just gets slimmer and slimmer every spray you do.
That's right. The ratoon crop in Texas, it's a bit of a perfect storm when it comes to rice delphacid pressure. Unlike the main crop, the ratoon crop is low input. Usually, you mow down the field after the main harvest, add a little fertilizer, and sometimes apply an insecticide if needed. It's not managed as intensively as the main crop. Because of that, the ratoon crop can become highly attractive and vulnerable to rice delphacids. So even though ratoon rice might seem low maintenance, it's really a crop where scouting and timely management can make a big difference in keeping rice delphacid populations from getting out of hand.
Well, Lina, thank you so much for giving us this information. Is there any events or any resources you'd like to point people to?
Yes, the Texas A&M AgriLife website is a great resource for more information about the rice delphacid, hoja blanca disease, and our ongoing extension efforts. The site is constantly being updated as we learn more, so it's worth checking this regularly. Right now, we are really focusing on short-term solutions. From the entomology side, that means identifying new chemistries that can help control the rice delphacid. From the plant pathology side, it's about understanding better the virus and how it spreads. And from the extension standpoint, it's all about communication and monitoring. Now, helping growers know when and where to scout so that we can catch problems early. Most of this information gets highlighted during our winter season extension talks as well, but it's important to remember, and I would like to highlight this as well, that this is a collaborative effort. It's not just the researchers or counting agents, extension specialists, crop advisors, researchers, stakeholders, all of us play a huge role in monitoring and scouting so that we can share best practices across the state.
Well, with that, Lina, I think I'm going to ask you our final question. It's the hardest question, and I know you've already answered quite a few hard questions, but let me ask you, what is your favorite rice?
Well, I would say that my most popular dishes include rice. However, basmati rice has become one of my favorite since moving here.
Oh, are you a fan of the Texas basmati or another type?
In general, any basmati. Yeah. Yes. What about you?
It changes. I'm really partial to this new aromatic medium grain that the Rice Experiment Station's releasing. I think they're calling it AM201, and we had it at our field day recently, and I just cannot stop eating it. Just all by itself tastes so good. It's very floral. Teresa De Leon's done a fantastic job. Another LSU person.
Yes, I know her. We were kind of classmates because she was in soil science, I was in entomology, but we kind of took courses together. So,
with that, Lina, thank you so much for being here today and sharing your expertise. I am sure we'll call you back on, so be prepared. But we are just so grateful to have you add to our information and help us stay vigilant, keep our eyes out there, and one, be aware of what you guys are facing out there, but two, also letting us know about potential threats to the rice industry as a whole. So thank you.
Yes. And I hope, the next time that I get here is not because, California is now dealing with this pest. But I will be happy to be back to talk about this or any other pest. Thank you for the invitation. And again, it is a pleasure to have this type of discussions. And my hope is that more people will be able to reach out to this information. So please, if you have any question about this pest, I will be happy to answer as much as I can. And you can reach out to me by email or by my phone number, which is 409-245-8632. Again, 409-245-8632.
Thank you, Lina. And we'll add your email to our show notes just in case more people want to reach out. But yes, thank you so much. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.
For more information, feel free to check out our resources, which include the UC Rice blog and the UC Agronomy Rice website. In terms of other resources you might want to take advantage of, you can also look at our newsletters, which include Rice Briefs, which covers Clusiolo, Rice Notes, which covers Yuba Sutter, Rice Leaf, which covers Butte and Glen, and Field Notes, which covers rice in the Delta region of California. Thanks for listening to Thoughts on Rice, a University of California cooperative extension podcast from the University of California Agricultural and Natural Resources. You can find out more about this podcast on our website, thoughtsonrice.buzzsprout.com. We'd love to hear from you, whether it's from using our text link in the show notes, a survey submission in our feedback form, also in the show notes, or in a comment or rating on your podcast streaming service of choice. Harvest is well underway here. Stay safe out there. And remember, like the growers like to say, have a rice life. Mention of an agrochemical does not constitute a recommendation, merely the sharing of research findings. Always follow the label. The label is the law. Find out more at ipm.ucanr.edu. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are the speaker's own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of the University of California. The material and information presented here is for general purposes only. The University of California name and all forms and abbreviations are the property of its owner, and its use does not imply endorsement of or opposition to any specific organization, product, or service.